premier experts in this work. And you can also share your thoughts. And as you arrive, we also like to ask people to just tell us where you're coming in from. And so just in the chat, maybe say hi to everybody and let us know where you're zooming in from. And in the meantime, I think, Tamia, we can begin. So it is indeed October 29th, and I am indeed Stacy Caldwell. So next slide. Thank you. And we are a nonprofit charitable organization. We're actually a community foundation. We raise dollars for this region and support nonprofits. We provide scholarships, and we work on, next slide, 4 very specific initiatives. These represent some of the tougher challenges and areas within our community that take more than one organization to really begin to address on a systemic level. First and foremost is strengthening our individuals and families. We wouldn't be a community without the people. So we program and connect resources to ways in which that takes place. We also operate the Mountain Housing Council to accelerate housing solutions for our local workforce. This particular program is a part of our Forest Futures, in which you'll learn more about that as well. And finally, we work through impact investing. So not only are we grant makers, but we leverage our dollars, public and private, by thinking creatively about the resources we can bring to bear, which actually includes impact investing as well. We have been engaged in climate-focused, nature-focused work through traditionally our grant making. We have a nature fund, and these are some of the wonderful nonprofits that we have supported over the years, not all of them, but some that you might recognize. And our Salon series launched about 3.5 years ago, and we have had so much fun hosting a myriad of organizations that are engaged in this work. If you want to talk about the forest, you might think that it's a fairly simple conversation, but you will quickly learn that there is a lot of depth and breadth to not only the ways in which we got to the situation we're here today, but the ways in which we can build solutions out, which is the hope that we grab onto every time we convene. Next slide, please. So what you're looking at here is a healthy forest. And we like to say that a healthy forest is one you can gallop a horse through. And if you look around in our community, you can certainly not gallop a horse through many of them. By thinning out and having a healthy forest, the sun is able to shine through all the way down to the floor. And it is a much better prospect for our watershed when we don't have as many straws in the ground. 60% of the water comes from the Sierra Nevada. Next slide. And so at the Community Foundation, we have been watching this just as you have. We're seeing these changing weather patterns. It was really the tree mortality issue that brought us into this community or this conversation, concerned about what we were seeing throughout California, recognizing that we have a lack of infrastructure to really address forest management, realizing that our community represents one of those high hazard zones. And we started to see that we are actually surrounded by a significant amount of piles of slash and wood, increasing forest fire, catastrophic fire, and then impacting our insurance. Next slide, please. So here we are today. And it is just a constant reminder we are not out of the worst fire season we have ever seen. 5 of the largest fires have ignited in 2020. 2020 just keeps on hitting, y'all. Over 4 million acres burned, over 10,000 structures, 31 fatalities. And we are now seeing a lengthening of our fire season, and it's not over. So the way we have rolled out our at TTCF, the way we're approaching this is first and foremost convene and educate and engage the community. And so that's our Forest Future Salon. To mobilize resources, which we've been doing through the Nature Fund. And we've also been raising a matching grant to drive this work here. We are looking at launching a creative solution through a donor advised fund. In the future, we believe that a venture fund could be launched to support this work, and looking at a creative space and way engaging for the innovations. And so accelerating those through a lab or these venture challenges. So with that, I have the pleasure of handing it over to Mia to put you in some breakouts. And for those of you who've been a part of these Zooms now, I shouldn't have to remind you, this is where you would bump into somebody at the pizza, picking up some dinner or a glass of wine at one of our traditional salons over the years. And one of the comments that was made when we were still meeting in person was that this is the best networking event they've ever attended, meaning you come to a Forest Future Salon and you get to hang out with not only the cool people, but you get to, know what's going on and hear from others who feel passionate about this work. So Tamia, maybe you can share how this will roll out and how much time they have. And then when we come back, Teal and Robert will host you in our presentation. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, everyone. Good to see you. You will begin to see on your screen an invitation to join a breakout room. So as soon as you see that, please feel free to accept it. And you have about 7 to 10 minutes to introduce yourself and get to know your breakout room partners and have fun. You can talk about your most recent experience with the forest, or what's your relationship with the forest, or anything that comes to your mind. So again, have fun.
so that's what happened with the consolidation. I'll stop there.
Hi, welcome back. I think we have everybody back. I'm looking for Tamia to give me a thumbs up, but I can't see her right now. So I'm going to just go with, oh, there she is. Thumbs up.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you all. We extended that just a little bit more than we had on past sessions. So hopefully that was a little bit of a good chance to get to know who's here today, or at least some small subset. I said this in my group, and perhaps this happened organically. If there's anyone you want to connect with and you don't get a chance to share contact over the chat, but might have over a cocktail, had that been the format, please don't hesitate to reach out and we will connect you. We want to enable you to network with one another. So if you miss that chance, email, text, reach out to us through the chat directly, whatever it is, and we'll make those connections. Perfect. So unfortunately, Stacy has had to step away, and we are going to jump right in to the agenda today. I want to introduce my colleague, Robert Suarez. He and I will co-moderate, co-facilitate the discussion, but Dan and Barney are both pros and remarkably accomplished individuals. So rather than dig into slides and presentations, we are going to look at their lovely faces and focus on a discussion today. And just to set the context for the conversation, as Stacy mentioned in the opening, we have a serious and growing problem. Most, if not everyone on this salon in the attendance here knows this and knows a certain amount of it in depth. Today's topic is one of the stickiest out there, which is how do we approach a landscape scale problem across borders that are defined by ownership or by political boundaries or by economic boundaries rather than just ecological boundaries. So if you take any map of California, you will see a massive checkerboard of land ownership. The largest single owner in that group is the federal public land. So Barney, who's with us today, is the Deputy Regional Forester for the Region 5 of the U.S. Forest Service, manages some 21 million acres. Barney, you'll have to correct me if I am wrong, in the state, something like 20% of the total land volume of California. So 57% of the forest in our state. So this is a massive amount of land. And then Dan Tomascheski, who is with us, Vice President for Sierra Pacific Industries, represents the single largest private landowner in the state, managing, and again, Dan, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong here, something over 1.6 million acres of forest land in the state. Rather than dig into your bios and your backgrounds and what it is that brings you to this moment in your careers, I will stop talking and we'll begin with a question for both of you. You've worked together in the past, you've worked together for years, so I know there's a lot to dig into. Robert, do you want to kick us off with the first question to Dan and Barney?
Sure, I would love to do that. I guess just to start at the highest level, Barney, I don't know, what was the number? 57 million? I can't take care of my yarn. So there's an interesting component of scale here that we're playing with and that we need for all the climate components of this. And I'm just wondering if you can discuss a little bit about your and your organization's strategies for managing that sense of scale.
So that's a really good way to start off. Let's stump our guest. Good job, Robert. For me and Teal, your numbers are pretty accurate. So the Forest Service manages, it's 20,800,000 acres and some change, which is just the Forest Service is 20% of the overall land base in the state of California. So when you think about the national forest and where we're positioned, there's not a lot that goes on national forest that doesn't have a drastic impact to all the people in the great state of California. 50 to 60% of all the water used comes off national forests. At one of the rest areas up Interstate 5, it shows the plummet of the state. And so if you look at that plumbing, you'll realize with all the different reservoirs where that water comes from. So what happens on national forest makes a big difference. So, but in the agency, we don't have the resources to be able to manage the problems and the magnitude of the problems that exist today. And, you know, so many people don't understand, you know, we get our budget from Congress. Congress allocates budgets on so many different type of things they want to see the national forest do on the land. For, you know, thinking historically, with the fires in the state, you know, our policy is to put the fires out. And that was a policy, as, you know, we had more and more people moving out into the rural areas. That was really, really important. But in a fire ecosystem, which California is, you know, that actually just really throws the system out of whack. And what we're fighting with today is how do we see about trying to put that system back into a rhythm, a natural rhythm, with a lot of different complications that exist. What do you do with the material? How do you deal with smoke? How do you deal with urban interface? I mean, how do you deal with the capacity issues with not a lot of infrastructure? And so we have some really major problems that are facing us. But what I normally say, I'm a fish biologist by training. And when I started my career, what was real obvious to me is whatever happened upslope ended up in the water. And it didn't matter whose land it was. It didn't matter where the boundaries were. That's just the result. And so for me, throughout my whole career, right around 29 years of being in natural resources, I look at the system. And a part of that system is how do we, and that's a big we, you know, plural pronoun, how do we work across an entire landscape to ultimately to make a difference? And so what Teal mentioned a little earlier is true. Dan Tomascheski and we've been working for over a decade on a lot of similar problems. You know, thinking about how do we do things differently? How do we take advantage of our knowledge and relationships to ultimately make a difference across the landscape? So that's just kind of maybe just a platform of, you know, managing across the checkerboard. A big part of that is relationships and how willing are you to be able to reach across and to talk to someone about, you know, what are those things that are common to both of us or all of us? And then we look at being deliberate about how do we go about doing that. Now, the national forest, we estimate that the Forest Service needs to treat anywhere between 6 to 9 million acres is what we estimate needs to be treated. And right now, with the amount of money that we spend roughly about 115 to maybe $150 million, and we treat about 235,000 acres. That's prescribed burning, massification, timber sales, invasive species control. So as you can see, that's quite a bit of money. But if we're going to make a big dent with being able to treat the number of acres that we want to treat, we've got a ways to go. And the Forest Service, we're not going to be able to make that on our own. And so we recognize that. And then we've been really trying to be proactive with a lot of different partners that we'll get into a little later with how do we work together to make a difference. And I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to Dan.
Okay, thanks, Barney. Well, Barney's right. We've collaborated over a long time, and the key in any of these kind of things is building relationships and trust, and trying to get out of the silos that we have, where Barney's involved in managing his land, and we're doing our thing, and the two don't quite connect. And with thousands of miles of interspersed ownership, particularly we were doing fire and fuels work, and fuel breaks and along roads and mastication and doing work along on our lands next to rural communities and in the WUIs and all that. But we were doing it sort of in conjunction with our annual harvest, and just so it wasn't an overall comprehensive approach on our lands, and it certainly didn't take into account the Forest Service lands. So I think really with the fires in 2018, Carr, Hirsch, Delta, Camp, et al., and we were as traumatized as anybody by the campfire, seeing charred bodies in the streets that morning as we went up with CAL FIRE to try to help them get lines established on us and all that. That was a sobering, sad thing that, frankly, we've had enough of. And I got together with Barney and I said, whatever we're doing, this isn't working. We're not working at the pace and scale we need to really make a difference here. And of course, the fires and all of that, they don't respect property lines. They don't respect process. They don't care how long your NEPA takes or how long our CEQA takes. We got to do better. So we put together a fire fuels MOU between us, CAL FIRE, Forest Service, and NIFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the original ones. And Barney can talk about how we've expanded that. But we've been meeting with the forest over the last few years with matched GIS layers. What do we already have done? Where are the priorities for protection of communities, wildlife, et cetera? Where do we need to be coordinating work across ownership? So we spent a lot of time at that, and we're having some successes. And some of the fuels work we've done has saved communities. The one just northwest of Susanville in the hog fire earlier this year is an example of that. So we're trying to break down the boundaries and barriers, and we're also trying to attract funding and on a scale that makes a difference. So we're doing a lot of work. We have a little over 1.6, 1.7 million acres. We'll be a little bit bigger shortly. And so we're a large owner. We're the second largest private landowner in the country. We just passed up Ted Turner to his eternal chagrin, as it really matters to him. It doesn't matter too much. So it's a big landscape even for us. We're planting anywhere from 7 to 12 million trees a year. It's higher in the fires and less. We're doing a lot of thinnings, and we're doing a lot of work along our roads, because 80% of the human-caused fires start along roads. That's a place to start, we think. So we're busy trying to get work done. We have a big program on us. We think our network of what we think on our lands for fuel breaks and all that will be built out in the next 3 to 5 years. We're spending a lot of money for us, $20-30 million a year, but we don't want to lose any more of this asset if we can help it. And so we have to work together, and we have to try to simplify our respective processes that we have to go through to get work. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you both. That gives a scale of where you are, and we can, I can imagine that you have a lot of shared borders. But speaking of the point of borders, you both talked about this ecosystem, other players, I guess, in the space, and it may be helpful for me in the audience. Can you elaborate more on what are the other players in this kind of complex web, and what are the types of relationships that are needed to really, really make a difference in improving our forest health? Because I can imagine how complex it is, and a bunch of them are probably on this meeting as well. So you want to speak to that? Some of those stakeholders?
Barney, why don't you go first? Is Barney there?
Barney, you got to unmute yourself. There you go.
There you go. So I think one is, so when we started with the relationship with Sierra Pacific Industries, CAL FIRE, and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, Dan's got a really good relationship with all the other industrial landowners. And we reached out and we invited all the other industrial landowners to join us in this fuels MOU, where we would look at how do we work together to jointly do work, jointly do surveys. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it's over a dozen. Matter of fact, all of the industrial landowners north of the Stanislaus National Forest have joined onto this MOU, and they represent 4 million acres. And so what Dan mentioned is we've had several program of work meetings. We're actually the industrial landowners and the forest supervisors, Dan and myself, we're actually there in the rooms looking at where have you done work? Where do you need to plan work for the next 5 years? And then what resources do we jointly need to be able to do that? So that's one example. In this agreement that we have, we've also decided that there are some other key players that need to be a part of that. And so just recently, Caltrans signed on to that. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is a part of that. Bureau of Land Management is signing on to that agreement. The United States Park Service is also going to be signing on to that. And I think just recently PG&E signed on to this MOU. So when we first started, it was, let's look at that work.
Barney, also Sierra
Say it again, Dan?
the Sierra Nevada Conservancy also.
And then also the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. And so when we started, let's continue to build out, and who are those other major players that we see need to be a part of that? Okay, so that's one group. Prescribed fire is another issue that we know exists, with being able to put more prescribed burn on the landscape. And so Sierra Pacific Industries, many of the environmental groups, the air boards, there's a prescribed fire MOU that exists in the state as well. I think that has maybe close to maybe 40 different entities that are looking at policy and resource allocation with being able to put prescribed fire back on the landscape. So those are just a couple of examples of work and other partners that we have, just representing, state, federal, industrial lands, and nonprofits. The Blue Forest work that's going on over in the Yuba on the Tahoe is another one. The Nature Conservancy is actually leading some NEPA work there on the Tahoe, the El Dorado, and the Lake Tahoe Basin. So those are just different examples, and we have master stewardship agreements with several counties as well. Sierra County just signed one with the Tahoe National Forest. Tuolumne County's got a master stewardship agreement with the Stanislaus National Forest, looking at how do all of us work together, share resources to make a difference on the landscape. So that's just a couple other examples that goes beyond just the work that Dan and I, are doing together here in the state.
Again, so I just building on that, it sounds like in some ways that's almost like building a team. Like we see this group doing this work. Let's get them on board. What I'm wondering is, has anyone, or maybe someone should take this on, is what's the recipe? Like, what are the kind of stakeholders you need, regardless of their names and their organizational ties, that would kind of create this? Because I imagine we'll want this to happen on a micro scale as well. You all are working at the macro scale, but I think there's a lot of passion to do that on a micro scale. So is there kind of like a formula recipe on how to get this stuff done for, communities and smaller groups?
This is Dan.
Talk there first.
Yeah, this is Dan. I think one of the best is the fire safe councils, and all those local community groups and collaborative efforts, they fail or they succeed based on the qualities and the commitments of the individuals that are within them. And so you see a range of competency and a range of getting things done, a range of being successful to get grant money to do work. But I think at the local level, the fire safe councils and the other collaborative groups are really important and need to be energized. They need some help. The grant writing, the process, for example, that California Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the CAL FIRE money, that's not a simple process, and it takes some skill and expertise and some time. There needs to be, I think, an increase in the ability and skill level in terms of grant writing, and then there are people to do the work, and it's not as difficult to contract to do the work. But and you're going to find a wide range of individual public perceptions and concerns. People love the privacy and the shade and the beauty that trees and forests give them. So if your house is plunked in the middle of very, very large trees with a high canopy closure and all that, they're a little messy, but they sure are beautiful, and they provide a lot of things. So there's some real resistance to opening that kind of thing up, and spacing those trees out and all of that. And a lot of people, although the number is declining, they have trouble visualizing what can actually happen to their house in their forest. There's a lot of second homeowners and things. I think now people are getting it. I mean, how could you not get it? But so you have to, wend your way through all those different, perceptions and prejudices and preconceived ideas, and that takes a lot of time to build that trust.
Yeah, and Robert, that was a really good question, and so being the resource deputy, and Dan's the vice president of operations, So I'm gonna be pretty candid. Somebody's got to do some doing. And then sometimes if you're trying something new, if you throw a net that's so broad, sometimes it won't lift because you've got too many conflicting interests. So in our case, when you look at SPI, 1.6 million acres, national forest over 20 million, what we spend our time and energy in is a demonstration from about leadership on the work that needs to happen. So when we started, and I'll be honest, when we started pretty small because we didn't want to have so many people involved that in so many different ideas and what you do and what don't you do that it wouldn't get any traction. And so now that we feel like we've got that traction, now the question is, who else needs to be a part of that? You know, Dan mentioned the Fire Safe Council. They're a big part of that. They do a lot of work on private land. They will need to be a part of that. Individual private landowners that have their own woodlots, they will need to be a part of that. So as we look at this problem with dealing with fuels in the state, it's all of us. You know, but when you think about how do you manage a really, really large landscape in order to really make a difference, you first got to get started first. And so I think that's the place where we are. The relationships are in place. And I think that is the foundation, is that you got to have the relationships. And we spent the time to build those relationships. And so now as resources become available, I think now we're able to use those to make a difference with the problem that we're all facing.
Thank you both so much. As I hear you speak about collaboratives, the fire safe councils, the small groups that rely so heavily on trust and relationship, I'm interested to hear each of you talk a little bit about when those groups work, when there are these webs of trust and relationship that you have built, what are your priorities? What are the solutions that you see that you would like to lean into, to scale, to grow? We talked a little bit about opportunities for the use of wood fiber and biomass in advance of this. That I'd love to hear your explanations and leaning into that, but also what are the solutions you would like to see these collaboratives take on, and where do you see the most traction?
You want me to start on that one, Dan?
Sure.
We got to get a handle on the people places. And what I mean by that is we've got to start somewhere. And when you look at the number of deaths that we've lost, the number of structures, homes and other structures that we've lost. So for me, I think that we start with, how do you protect communities? And, you know, we can talk and have discussions about what a buffer looks like, how wide the buffer needs to be, and, you know, how much do you thin? So I think you start with communities. I mentioned Caltrans. Caltrans is a part of the work that we're doing. About 80% of the fires start where? They start along roads. So Caltrans is going to be vital. And so how do we do work along major roads and major areas to get people in and out in case of emergencies with fire? So that's another place. And then we got to protect our critical infrastructure. I'm not sure if probably most of the people on the phone or on this call today probably had their power shut off from PG&E, this last week or so based on fire potential and high winds. We've got to protect that infrastructure. So let's protect along our power lines, those right of ways, and water conveyance as a part of that. And the other one is like, for instance, industrial lands. We've got to protect those as well. You know, those industrial landowners, they make investments, they're not insured. And, you know, and if we want forests in the future, we have to protect those. So for me, I think if I need to treat roughly 9 million acres, and if I've got a goal of treating 500,000 a year, I'm on a pretty big rotation already. And I've got to start somewhere. And so for me, those are the places I think that we focus on first. And I think you can start to get a lot of buy-in from a lot of different people, because those things that I just mentioned make a difference to everyone. And I think we could rally around that, get some agreements on that. And then once that happens, I think people are willing to put their resources towards those areas.
And I'll chime in there. But Barney's absolutely right. The work around communities, the people places, water conveyances, power lines, that's our priority as well. Now, when we first started this, we were doing work on us to protect, in our view, protect us from the private small landowners, out there in the burn pile, lighting it off on a day when you shouldn't, or, mowing the weeds or whatever. So we started early on trying to do work to protect us from them, but in actuality, it's a two-way street, and it protects both of us. We've seen a much more enlightened, I think, public attitude on the part of landowners, second homeowners, and people that live there permanently, as to doing thinnings and all that, where we would generate controversy before next to a rural subdivision by doing thinning or harvesting practices. Now, part of the time they say it's not thin enough. You need to take some more. I mean, we're trying to buffer and not make it look too bad. But so I think the attitudes have gotten better. The single biggest issue is what to do with the biomass that won't make material that we can make lumber out of and things. So there is no market where you can even break even, let alone make a profit. The subsidy to the existing standalone power plants has helped, and that was extended. The rates that they can afford to pay are high enough to attract biomass deliveries. For a while there, the whole industry was in decline, so the infrastructure to do the harvesting and shipping of biomass and transportation just was disappearing. But there's not enough standalone biomass plants. We need more. And one of the things I say often, which hasn't got any traction yet, is when PG&E starts a fire, or even when SBI starts a fire, or somebody, you're on the hook for suppression costs. And of course, PG&E, as an example, they're now SoCal Edison, maybe in the South, they're looking at huge amounts of money. And wouldn't it be nice to take a little bit of that money and not have it go to the federal treasury or to the state general fund, and make PG&E build some more biomass plants and then run them at cost, buy the power, and then have them open so everybody from a mom and pop with 3 bushes in the yard they want to trim, all the way scaled up to people like us, could bring the biomass there, maybe even pay a small tipping fee, $10 for a small owner. But it would be much more productive use of those settlement monies to establish some more biomass power plants scattered around the Sierras and over on the Coast Range than what's happening now. That's the single biggest impediment, we think, to getting more work done at pace and scale, is what do we do with that stuff? And there's a huge area now where the densities of the vegetation, it's too dense to introduce prescribed fire right now without having a real problem. So the reduction down to where we could do more prescribed fire and be safe about it is going to take a while. In addition, the liability laws in California, as an owner, if we employ prescribed fire and it gets away and it burns onto Barnie, we're on the hook for suppression costs, and there's no insurance. And the insurers now are really, really tightening up even your general liability insurance because of what's happened in California, not just homeowners, but general liability for people like us. So without some sort of much expanded cooperative program with CAL FIRE through their BMP program, where then they have some, and then a landowner has some protection for prescribed fire, it's not going to happen at much of a scale because it's too risky there. And you could easily, even at our size, could easily be bankrupted by a set of prescribed fire projects that gets away and burns, or God forbid, part of trucking. We're done as a company. So there's some real impediments. That's the one that we wrestle with all the time. And I can always comment more, or you can call me after this and we talk. I'll shut up.
Hey, so it's great, Dan, because I just, here's an example. When we talk about something that's so big and then, you don't have movement. But does anybody remember Senate Bill 1122?
I do.
We were supposed to build 2 to 3 megawatt biomass facilities up and down the Sierras. Does anybody know how many we built? Say it again, Dan.
0 so far. There's proposals out.
And what
9 underway in the Sierra Nevada.
how many?
Being held up by a lot of things, including the lack of a sustainable biomass source in contracting.
So how many have we have?
We've got about 9 underway. but then
Underway?
None of them have gotten over the final hurdle. It's
Okay.
financing now. It's
Okay.
financing.
How big are those ones that are underway though?
They're 1 to 3 megawatts, and they can be up to 5 megawatts, but they can only put 3 megawatts into the grid under SB 1122.
And you know, we have 7 biomass plants. The last one we built was 31 megawatts, and we feel like we know what we're doing in terms of construction and all that. And they don't pencil out at 3 to 5 megs without significant subsidies. You can't build one and at the $12 million it's going to cost, and you can build a 12 megawatt plant for 20. The other thing is with 1 to 3 megawatts, 3 or 4 van loads a day of fuel covers the place up. They aren't big enough to get the fuels off the forest that need to be off. I'm not criticizing them or saying we shouldn't be doing them, but they need to be bigger. And if they're not going to be significantly subsidized, then you can't build them you can't build a little one like that and make it pencil out or get financing. That's just our view.
Dan, question for you. Are those facilities generating electricity or electricity and heat?
Both. They have 3 purposes. They generate electricity so we can run our sawmill. They generate electricity and they run a steam turbine, and the steam dries our lumber. And then we sell outside. We sell about 150 megawatts outside to the grid, mostly to PG&E, but in Washington State to Pacific Power and Light and Seattle Power and Light. And we have had a contract in the past with SMUT where we wheeled power. So several different customers, but three different uses of that power.
Yeah, but how about the heat energy? Is there a lot of waste heat, or is that heat used?
No, well, that's in the kilns. I mean, that goes into the drying the lumber, the heat from the kiln. So there is not a lot. The issue with us is that the residue that comes in off from the saw logs that won't make lumber or won't make planer shavings for horse bedding or bark for landscaping. We have enough fuel in general just from what the sawmill produces to run those plants, even those big ones. So we're not a very good market for outside biomass because we're pretty much self-sufficient. That's an issue.
Leaving space for others to jump in, but I also am curious, this discussion of economics specifically, and what are the economics that would enable wood fiber use, that would enable biomass use, that would catalyze the larger megawatt plants or frankly any, as we're discussing. I kind of want to pivot that toward you, Barney, as well, because one of the challenges is the way in which resources and budgets are allocated for your work. And this discussion of, how should the economics work such that they solve the problem? Could you describe a little bit of how your budget is focused on landscape scale restoration and where some of the challenges and opportunities lie within the public sector's budget for this work as well?
So the way we get our budget, we get so much money to produce so much timber volume. And then we get other funds, particularly fuels money, to treat acres. And so that could be prescribed burning, doing other mechanical stuff like massication, things along that nature. So that's how we get our money. I think economically, one of the things that I think could make a big difference for us is right now the few biomass facilities that are on the landscape are at a distance from the material. It doesn't pencil out. And that's one of our problems, is that the material is too far away from where the facilities are. Now, in some cases, if we've got a project, the Forest Service will add money to a project in order to be able to move the material, but that only goes so far. And so let me give you an example. So in the Southern Sierras, there's only one other sawmill left, and that's in Terabella. And so when you think from the Stanislaus south, there's not another facility. And what we ran into, particularly with tree mortality, that was Grand Central Station on the Sierra, Sequoia, in the southern end of the Stanislaus National Forest, but there's no place to take it. Now you might say, okay, well, wait a minute. There's Rio Bravo or Rio, whatever that place is down in Fresno. Yeah, that's a great idea. But guess what they're taking? They're taking agriculture stuff. And they're used to somebody driving up, dumping that stuff off, maybe even charging them for it. And so they have no interest, or didn't have any interest. And matter of fact, when they signed the biomass contract, they turned it back because it just didn't pan out for them. So in the Southern Sierras, which not only deals with us, but also, you think about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they're in the place. And so in cases like that, when you drive there, you see all these logs piled up, you see dead trees everywhere, and it's going to continue to be that way until somebody develops or builds another facility that's going to be close. And that's going to really be tough, because what we often don't talk about is that biomass is competing against natural gas, wind, and solar. And so as long as that biomass is competing against those that are subsidized and are cheaper, there's not a lot of incentive for PG&E to want to expand to do biomass. So we've got this problem that we've got to find out what to do with biomass, this non-mergeable, low-value material. Because if not, we're going to be in this cycle for quite a while. Not unless someone comes up with a lot of money for transportation subsidies.
And I'll follow up with that. The wind and solar people, they have better lobbyists than the biomass, or better, so far anyway. They don't provide a base load where they run 24 hours a day. That's a weakness. They're trying to, of course, increase battery technology, storage, and all that. Batteries are expensive at this point. But there are some real disincentives, or people working against biomass. The PUC, up until recently, didn't want the ratepayers to subsidize higher power rates that biomass energy would require in order to make a go of it. There was elements in the environmental community that felt that biomass power increases, which was just an excuse on the part of people like us to cut more trees. The reality, God, we got enough trees. We got way more trees that we can cut. That's not an issue, but in some people's mind it is. And then biomass power, just like any other power generation like that, natural gas, it does generate CO2. Now you're offsetting CO2 emissions from fires, all the externalities, I call it, of wildlife damage and watershed damage and all of that biomass can help if we don't have fires. And of course, burning in a biomass plant in terms of emissions from NOx and other air emissions is way lower than open burning or prescribed burning would be. But we haven't been able to get over that hump, and that's a big deal. The one last thing I'll say is I'm not much of a technology guy with Zoom. I hardly ever do it. I try to keep a low profile, but Teal charmed me into this. So I see at the top, I'm getting a lot of questions, and I don't know how to answer. And at the end, I'll just give you my cell phone. You guys can call, or you can send me an email. So I apologize if I'm not answering right now, because I really don't know how. Sorry.
Dan, not to worry. We'll intentionally call some of those out as well, where we can, so that folks can ask those questions out loud as well. So that's so thoughtful of you, and we'll also try to be tracking that and bringing it up. Robert, go ahead. I just wanted.
I was just commenting on what you both said. I fundamentally believe that the cost of power is going to increasingly go down. So it doesn't seem like the best market to chase for the biomass for all the reasons you said. And it can't be small because it's not efficient enough to pencil out. They can't be big and centralized because they're too far from the source. So yeah, a lot of complexity here, but I know you wanted to go into something more action oriented. Teal,
I'm seeing, go ahead.
Teal, let me say this. I think we often look at our world as one-dimensional, and I think that's a problem. So we're thinking about the cost of energy and what that might mean. Is it cheap? Is it not cheap? But the reality is If we were to go back to 2017 and 2018, I think between CAL FIRE and the Forest Service, we spent $2 billion on fire suppression. Let that number sink in. 2 billion. Okay. So, and then let's take the number of homes that are lost, the number of lives that are lost, the amount of smoke we put in the air, a landscape now that's open for invasive species, a landscape now that in the wintertime, we're going to probably have a lot of sedimentation that makes its way to our reservoirs. And then our reservoirs, somebody's going to have to spend millions and millions of dollars to clean them out. We don't talk about if you're a rural community and your economic base is tourism from people camping and hunting and hiking. And when that landscape is burnt, people don't come. So when we talk about the cost, we never talk about the true costs, or we never talk about the habitat for threatened and endangered species that if we're lucky, if somebody plants trees, we might have habitat in the future 100 years from now. That's if we're deliberate. Or if we want forest, we have to be deliberate. And so when we talk about the cost, we talk about the cost from, hey, let's compare biomass to natural gas and wind and solar. But a part of the problem is the no action alternative with us not getting at this on a larger scale. It has a price tag that is astronomical, not only social, economic, and also environmental. And we never, and very seldom do we talk about all those components that are associated with this problem that we have.
Tia, this is Jim Boyd. Can I jump in for a minute?
Please, Jim.
For your audience, I'm a former California Energy Commissioner, as well as Chief of Staff of the Resources Agency and a lot of other things. The points that are being made by Dan and Barnie, particularly Barnie's last comment, if I jumped in sooner, I would have said you're pushing a rock uphill here. I am a great proponent of biomass to power. The environmental community sadly thinks it's dirty power, so they are problems, let's just say, and difficult to work with on the subject. The utilities do not like this power. They're forced to take it by that bill. It took years for us to get that bill into the legislature and pass because it's more expensive power, and they take a lot of grief over California's power is the most expensive. Plus, some of the policies that have been put forth for over a decade about the need to diversify the power sources and use this power have been ignored by other policy people. The PUC has been 100% biased towards solar and nothing else for almost a decade. Other people are in that same area. So when you say, well, let's make PG&E give them the opportunity to build more plants, there'll have to be a major policy shift in California to facilitate that. And I think the idea of using some of the fine money or the penalty money to do that would be a great idea, because in the short term, it's the fastest way we have to get some of this stuff out of the forest. Everybody's making long-term plans. Nobody's saying, but what can we do day after tomorrow, so to speak, to do this?
Well, I guess to your point of diversifying energy sources, I think there's some questions in the chat about, and my comment was maybe diversifying the biomass utilization, because we don't have a lot of options when people ask, what can you do with it? It's either power or burn it.
Well, I would agree with you on that, because Tahoe Fund's trying to get Loyalton back up and running, and we want them to build a small log power plant there. Sawmill there to pull even more wood out, and nobody's interested in sawmills. We may get it anyway, but it's an uphill struggle. I'm just saying to all of you, this idea of the societal benefits being put into the equation is the answer. The climate offsets began to enter that equation, but we have put that before the legislature and the administration on my watch for a decade. And because it doesn't generate money today, but saves money in the future, it's not been popular. I think you need to make that argument more now on the very points that you pointed out about the incredible amounts of money we've spent on fighting fires would have been offset by measures taken a decade ago, perhaps. So in any event, that enough said.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. It's interesting, Robert, you said, that I had been wanting to pivot to something action oriented. The question I was actually going to ask is something that Jim and Barney just spoke very eloquently to, which is if there was one thing, and actually Emily Blackmer asked this in the chat as well, so referencing that question, if there was one thing that would move the needle, if there was one thing that would pivot or take us over an inflection point toward greater, larger scale restoration of our land such that we have healthier forests in our state, what might it be? What I just heard Jim say was monetize the value of the public benefit, if I might summarize. I don't know if that's exactly how you might put that, but certainly that's a piece of what I just heard articulated. Barney and Dan, you've touched on this, but any further reflections on what that one thing might be?
Well, this Dan, the ability to take that biomass somewhere and get it off the land, that's number one. I might mention, somebody else had mentioned synthetic fuels from biomass or woody biomass. That's the holy grail, would be the ability to convert woody biomass into transportation fuels at scale. I mean, you could argue about transportation fuel, but that would be a huge market. And we participated over the years in 4 pilot projects. And the reason we get involved, one, we have an interest in helping and trying to come up with solutions here for California and the world, but also we have industrial plants where those potential facilities could be sited because the zoning already allows it. We're on rail, which you would need to be on rail in order to transport significant quantities of synthetic fuels. And we have power, and we have the interconnection because that takes some power. So we've participated in 4 projects, pilot projects, over the last 25 years, and none of them have been able to scale the process up to really turn it into a production method that could stand on its own. The latest one we're involved in is with Lawrence Livermore, Iowa State. They're with an Energy Commission grant to Lawrence Livermore, and we're providing the site up at just above Placerville at our old Salon site there. And COVID has put it back a year, but it's a very small project, like 50,000 bone-dry tons of biomass, which is not very much. A normal chip van carries 25, and they have 30 days in order to produce this required amount of synthetic fuel. So that would be something that would really be a game changer. But so far as I'm aware of, and there's a big project now being built in Klamath Falls to supply jet fuel. It's underway. Maybe that one's going to finally break through. But boy, would that be something, a positive thing.
And then for me, if you gave me the good and the silver bullet, I would look at how do you diversify different. I wouldn't want to put everything towards just the biomass for energy. I'll be looking at what are some other ways for us to use wood. And then I would couple that with, we have to incentivize the use of our own wood in California. We're a huge importer of wood. And so we need to find out something some kind of wood product that can be developed, and we incentivize the use of our own wood to be able to do that. And, I often think, and in my mind, when you were asking about that, Till, I was thinking, you go to IKEA and most of the furniture you buy is particle board. And I used to remember when I was on the coast of North Carolina, all those ships would come, they would load in the chips from warehouse, or they would go across the water. And then the next thing you know, we would be buying this particle board furniture. And so I see Michael laughing in the background over there. And so we've got to do something like that. And so is there a way for us to create and diversify the use of wood products in a way that is substantial enough? We make a difference in the woods, make our woods safer, our forests safer, and then it pencils out economically for someone.
Thank you both. Dan, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we've also explored wood pellets, torrefied wood pellets. We had thought with Now, most of that goes to Northern Europe, and it's pretty heavily subsidized, and most of it comes out of the Southeast U.S., a shorter haul than the West Coast. But we had thought that with the Fukushima disaster and Japan getting away from nuclear plants, and they had a pretty good dependence on nuclear energy, that it would open up the market. So far, it really hasn't, and there are some issues with wood pellets. The wood has to be debarked, so it can't, really small pieces. You need the wood inside the bark. You can't use the bark for the torrefied wood pellets. And then the issue is transportation. Where do you put the plant? Do you put it at the port because you're going to have to ship it? You put it closer to the woods, and then the prices contemplated in Asia for wood pellets won't support the operation and the what it would take to do it here at scale. So we've looked at that one too. We looked at with really small logs, the tops, peeling them down and kind of rounding them up to make fence posts. Jeff Holland, the guy that's actually buying the cogeneration plant at Moyleton and trying to build a sawmill, he's the one we worked with at our old plant site at Camino to do that. And of course, what happened, we made so damn many fence posts, we covered up the whole market. I mean, there's a lot of small material out there. And they weren't able to purchase it at scale to allow Jeff to really continue that. So we're trying. I mean, if you've got an idea, call me up.
Dan, I'm going to get your cell phone number. We got a lot of ideas. We've been doing a lot of research in this space. There are some opportunities, but certainly scaling them up would require that ecosystem that we're talking about. And I guess that's something that's a thread that we were chatting, and I saw in the chat line something about, you mentioned ecosystem services, I guess, Barney, in general, like what is the true cost of every action that we take? And there was some thoughts on, I think Lauren, Chris Colhart had some questions in that space, Matt Tucker. I don't know if we want to address some of that. What are the ecosystem services of the work that we're doing? We're trying to fix, and it might circle around climate change or, the socioeconomic costs as well.
Well, so water is one. So we think about the water and the value of water. The serenity that the forest offers, and you think of, we saw a huge uptick with COVID-19. Just to name a few, those are the big ones that come to mind right now. So, this is Dan. Just the water quality from the watersheds. I mean California is not super flush on water for communities and for people, or of course for wildlife either. So. The quality of the water, and when we look at what's happening here in California, take our lands that burn. We aren't required by law to reforest, but that's our business, and if we don't do that, we're going to be out of business someday. So we're going to replant. We're already on the Bear Fire where we took the biggest. We're harvesting trees. You'll see burn logs going down the road, and we already have sowing requests in nursery stores or seedlings for next year. So we're going to reforest it. And it's not cheap, even at our scale, and it's not a secret. It costs us about $600 an acre to do the reforestation, make sure the trees are free to grow. But on the national forests, and they have over time lost a lot of the expertise on the reforestation end. They used to have a vigorous nursery program, seed collection. You got to have seed, can't grow trees, and planting and silviculture expertise, vegetation management. So you're seeing a lot of the national forests here in the recent burns, the Rim Fire, King Fire, and others. You're not seeing a significant amount of the acreage being reforested. So you're going to have for a long time here brush, and you're looking at a type conversion on some of these forests where you're going to convert it to a scrub for brush type forest. You'll have some timber on the north slopes, some timber in the draws along the streamside zones, but you're going to have portions of the Sierra National Forest and even the Coast Range that look a lot like Southern California, look like the San Gabriels. And I think that would be a real tragedy. And a
big need is to allow, fund, get the Forest Service back in the reforestation business. I think the type conversion that's underway right now is a significant event for California. I'll stop there.
Yeah. I think, Robert, probably the next biggest one that I think most people often think about is like the storage of carbon. You know, so water and storage of carbon are probably the biggest. And when I talked about, you know, the aesthetics and visiting the national forest, that has a lot of value that we don't necessarily monetize a lot, but it has a huge value to, you know, just as human beings, our wealth and health and well-being. So water, you know, carbon storage, and just the appreciation for nature, the habitat benefit for a lot of different species that exist, you know, in forested landscapes. You know, the stabilization of soil, you know, I mentioned it as a part of the fires, but, you know, if the soil stabilized and it's not making its way and it's not degrading aquatic habitat for fish or freshwater mussels, it's not making its way into reservoirs where you reduce storage capacity. I mean, there's a lot of different things. If you stop just to really think about it, there's a lot of different things that make a big difference to most of us on a day-to-day basis, but just most of us don't know.
Yeah, I guess on that, and back to the monetization, with the scale that you're working at, what about have carbon credit? Is that every other meeting I'm in, like literally every other meeting, those two words come up together. So I don't know how that's been affecting some of your work or your thoughts or looking into the future.
From our perspective, we're in the carbon market and have been. We were involved in developing the regulations that the Air Board put together, CAR, the Climate Action Registry, and all that stuff. And so we have sold a number of carbon projects, and we have another, I think, 12 in the pipeline. It's a complicated, difficult process to get registered. Third-party verification of the carbon stock on the ground and your practices is expensive, really expensive. And so it's no simple process, but we are participating in that market, and our carbon stocks are going to go up significantly over time with the reforestation plan and replacing slow-growing stands with faster-growing stands in terms of mean annual increment, we call it. So we're active in the carbon market. It could be simpler. It could have lower barriers to entry for a small private landowner, or even somebody that's got 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 acres. There's one simple way, which is you just grow bigger trees. But to actually actively manage and harvest trees and count that temporary loss and what the increase is going to be coming on from the new trees, that's no simple process. So the purchase of carbon bonds and the carbon resiliency or funding projects, say on the Forest Service, like Blue Forest, that has merit, and we're not opposed to that at all. Will significant people with significant funding step up in a big way with that? We're not sure yet. And of course, if you're going to get paid for it, you better damn well get the work done. That's on the federal lands. That's going to take some work effort.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
And our role is a little different. So we don't access for, being with the federal government, we don't play in actually the carbon markets. We're actually at the place where people implement projects. And one of the things Dan talked about is all the projects from the California Climate Investment Program. You've got to demonstrate the carbon benefit. And so a lot of different entities are partnering with the Forest Service, and they're doing a lot of projects on the Forest Service, for those future carbon storage. And that's the role that we play. I do know even before I came to California, there were conversations about, the carbon market. And there are a lot of different people that don't think that the federal government should be participating into the carbon market. And so that's another debate for another day. But there are some people that disagree with the role that the federal government should play actually in the market. So for instance, for us right now, we're happy and excited to work with all of our different partners and the different collaboratives with being able to implement these projects on the national forest.
Speaking of money, speaking of money, I have received a few questions directly, which range everywhere from recreation on your lands, easements and conservation opportunity on your lands, insurance and the ways in which that may play a role in participating in risk reduction as a funder. I would love to both open it to Q&A. I think Robert and I would love to take the rest of the time we have for that and start with, if I can call on someone, Nick Wobrock, could you jump in with your question on insurance? I think it's actually a really relevant follow-on to Barney's comments just there.
Sure. Well, thank you. And thanks for the discussion. I couldn't have agreed more when Barney was talking about the value of water and soil. That's partly though because I'm a water resource engineer by training, so I love water, and probably more than many others, not on this call, but across the state, are willing to sometimes pay for water. But the true cost of water and carbon, I think, should be much higher. But one area where we're seeing real losses on balance sheets are with insurance. Insurance losses, community losses, not just property and casualty insurance for homes, but losses in terms of private timber, sometimes family-owned timber too. Is there any thoughts with respect to how the insurance market, and/or I'll also ask about public health and air quality across the state in the Western U.S. If there's thoughts on either of those with respect to monetization or mechanisms that may help that type of economic benefit contribute to forest management.
So Nick, I think there has been just conversations with the insurance lobby or different, just that entity altogether. But I don't know that there's been any traction at all with, how they're willing to work to be proactive versus being reactive. As a society, we're okay with that. We're willing to sit back and just take whatever comes to us versus being proactive. So I don't think there has been. I don't know if anyone knows anything different, but I know there's been some conversations. I know there's been many people, I think different assembly members and the Conservancy. I just don't think there's been any traction with the insurance companies in relation to, trying to do something to be proactive. And what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry, Nick.
No problem. And I see Dan. Nice to see both of you too on insurance. The thing about air quality potentially too, just as a recent thing. Perhaps either of you have comments on that.
So
air
Dan,
quality and public health. So
one of the things that we struggled for a while with looking at working with some of the different air boards in the state with being able to do more prescribed burning. And, there's been a lot of different presentations with the amount of carbon and the particulate matter that's released as a part of these really large wildfires versus under control situation when you prescribe burn. And there's been a lot of movement there. And so now, I mentioned a little earlier, there's a prescribed burn MOU. Well, many of the air boards in the state are a part of that because I think they're starting to see the benefit now of it's much better if we do some prescribed burning versus the huge plumes that we see in the health benefits. So I think we're starting to turn, we're not exactly where we need to be just yet, but I do think there is a philosophy change with, how do we try to put more prescribed burning on the landscape to prevent these huge losses that we're experiencing for instance, this past year.
I think on the prescribed burns, I know Matt had a question earlier about that. I don't know, Matt, if you're still available to ask that question.
Yeah, I'm here. So the question was for either of you. Are you noticing that with the increase in the length of the wildfire season, that it's getting more difficult to actually safely do controlled burns?
Yeah, this is Dan. We have a network of over 100 weather stations out and have had almost that many for 20 years. So we have a long-term data set. And what we're seeing is the vegetation is drier, the ERC, the release component, energy release component, the Haynes index, a technical measure of the willingness to burn, if you will. Those are higher. And so the fuels are drier for longer periods of time over the last few years. You'll get an exception. If you remember 2019, one of the wettest winters we had, in a long time, and we had a very, very quiet fire season. So the winter we have and how fast the large fuels, 100-hour fuels dry out is really a factor. But so we are seeing less opportunity for prescribed fire in the late fall and the spring than we had in the past. It's still there, but that window is shrinking. And then on the insurance thing, you can't insure your timberland for losses. In a very few cases, very expensive. You can insure plantations or trees that you planted that aren't merchantable yet, and if they burn, you can get some coverage, but it's very small scale, not for anybody with extensive holdings like us, and it's really expensive. So there is not much help in the insurance market, and even if the local representatives of the insurers or underwriters are comfortable with operations, people like us with all the weather stations, all the restrictions on daily activities, all of that stuff, the people that really call the shots are the big underwriters, mainly based in New York and Europe. They're the AIGs and the Lloyd's of London. And those people, given what's happened and they read headlines, they're scared to death of California. And they're the real decision makers. So as California continues to have these problems, those people continue to retreat.
And then, Matt, I'll add a little bit more. And like, for instance, under normal circumstances, this would be the time of the year. It's a great time of the year to do prescribed burning, but we're still in fire season, and we're out of resources and we're having a hard time getting enough resources to do fire suppression. So if you're a district ranger or a forest supervisor, the last decision you want to make is to do a prescribed burn, and it gets away from you. And you guys the Caples burn on the El Dorado, being you guys are there in Truckee, you guys might have seen some of the news articles that as a result of the Caples burn, I mean, it was a really good burn, but it ended up being a wildfire. And so when you, as a line officer, when you make that decision to burn, you really want to make sure you've got enough resources to be able, if it gets a little bit bigger than what you planned for, to be able to put it out. And so for right now, we're still in fire season and there's a shortage of resources. So it's not just California, but it's Washington and Oregon and Colorado. Even though it's great burning season, you're not going to do prescribed burning because we're really working hard to have enough for fire suppression.
The other issue we have is CAL FIRE has a VMP program, vegetation management, where they will prepare an environmental document under CEQA. And then when the time is right, they will participate with somebody like us and do prescribed fire. The issues with those is they don't have enough people to do the CEQA documents. The one unit forester they have, one per unit, is got all kinds of other work to do, including timber harvest activity regulation and timber harvest plan review and all that. So they often have trouble getting the environmental work done. And then when it comes time to burn in the late fall or winter, their fire crews have worked 24-hour shifts for months at a time. They're wore out. And CAL FIRE, for budget reasons, lays them off. So the personnel that you would need to do prescribed fire on private lands at scale, where you would have CAL FIRE helping you and therefore have some immunity if something gets away, those people aren't there. They're laid off. And CAL FIRE doesn't have the money to keep them on all winter. So we're advocating a budgeting enhancement to CAL FIRE, hire more people that can write the environmental documents, and then maybe in the fall, when fire season's finally over, give those crews a month off, but bring back some of them to help us do the VMP and the prescribed fire work that needs to be done. Just another random thought.
Thank you. Greg, do you want to jump in with a question?
Sure. Thanks, Teal. One of the socioeconomic impacts we saw here locally in Truckee in the Tahoe Basin was the closing of the national forests during the peak fire season. And I don't think it's been mentioned yet, but I can't see that trend continuing without, impacts on our community, particularly a downturn in visitors that actually recreate on public lands, and they also recreate on Sierra Pacific lands as well. So I guess one of my questions is there any kind of long-term strategy or long-term evaluation of those fiscal impacts and any kind of adaptive management plan that the Forest Service might have for keeping national forests open once prescribed burns take place or once thinning occurs, to reduce the impacts on the communities.
So, Greg, I haven't been a part of any of the long-term strategies as far as that goes. One of the things that this year was really different is COVID was in some ways an eye opener for us. So what happened earlier on, if you remember with COVID, a lot of our officials were saying, wanting people to get out and go outdoors and things like that. And they came. And when they came, many of our forests had hundreds of fires of campfires that were left unattended. And so when you look, and so just the number of fires that occur from people leaving those, so that put us in a situation where, one, now you're dealing with COVID, and now you've got fires and everything else in relation to that. And that put us in a situation where we were closing down the forest. Particularly, we were looking at day use was fine, but as far as having any kind of campfires, no. It was a tough decision to make, and that's where we landed, just based on the horrific fire season that we were dealing with. This year, I think, was probably the worst year that we've ever had, and we've never had to think about it in this way. Normally, you would almost have an individual forest that might have a closure on campfires or something like that. But this past year, it was so devastating that we just had to do it on a regional level. To answer your question on what do we know really what the impacts were, particularly economically to the different communities? No, I don't have any idea, but I'd imagine it's pretty severe, particularly those communities that totally rely on tourism as their financial base, to make things happen. So guess what? Not only is it COVID, not only do we have shelter in place, counties don't want anybody there, and now the forest is shut down in addition. So, there's a lot of things that lined up in a negative way that I know that are going to most certainly affect a lot of the rural communities that rely on tourism. But I don't have any idea what that overall impact is. I just think it's pretty significant.
I just want to say that Emily has shared that SNC released a report studying the impacts of fire and tourism in the Sierra Nevada. That's in the link, and maybe we can capture some of these links and share them back, because Emily continues to be a great resource for this type of stuff. I just want to kind of open it up now. There were some questions in the chat, but the chat got really long, so I lost track. But is there anyone in the audience here who has some questions for our experts, or really for the group?
I have a bit of a question out of left field, so I might be way off. But I'm thinking that California's forest has lots of tourists, lots of people camping. And is there anywhere that has found that actually you could use people having campfires as a way to get rid of some of the wood? So I'm thinking installing like super deep, super secure fire pits, and then encouraging people to have campfires. But that might be way off.
We've considered that way off.
I think I always encourage wild ideas, because then you can always track them back. Because there is something about, there are citizen scientists, there's groups doing this where citizen scientists will go out and do the testing. So it's not a far stretch, right? TaskRabbit, Uber, these massive companies have shown us that underutilized resources can be potentially utilized. And in this case, I know some of the people you camp around, and I don't know if I would trust them either. But I love the idea and where it could lead.
So we do have people. So Hannah, there are people they will use dead and down limbs as a way for their fires. So they do that in and around their general area. This past year as well, the Forest Service, we normally sell firewood. So we allow free firewood for the whole summer for people to go out. We're thinking about the number of people that had lost their jobs. So we did that this past year, but we've never done anything on a grand scale that allows just the average person to be out in the general forest, doing their burning, because there's a lot of different things that go into burning. So, you burning in a fire pit is easy, but if you're doing something different than that, it can be pretty technical. And that's why a lot of people don't want to do it, because the risk is pretty high.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking about using an asset and something that already exists, and interesting kind of ideas that can mobilize things that already exist. So, but I appreciate that response.
Hannah, I have seen research from the Rocky Mountain Research Station about using biochar to spread on forest floor, so not having to haul it nearly as far, and in a stable and carbon sequestered approach that actually can increase forest productivity. And I'm not sure the constraints on how to make biochar in with a mobile unit, perhaps, or things that might be possible to severely limit the haul distance. But in terms of a way to both reduce fire risk and have certain beneficial properties, whether in carbon sequestration or even enhancing carbon sequestration with forest growth.
There's actually a torrefication process that can fit on the back of a pickup truck. It's being developed.
All Power Labs sort of.
So I like the torrefication, and that just kind of getting out there and reducing the transport and just finding new technologies. People, Hannah being one of those things, technology. So yeah, I think it's a great. We started this conversation saying we have to have a greater diversity in solutions, and we have to think this way to even try to get there. So
this is Mark with Sierra Pacific. I think some of these ideas are great ideas. One of the challenges I think we face, however, though, is the volume and the need for the volume to get done. I know that we work with All Power Labs. We helped them get a grant before, and their biggest issue about those small units, which they were putting around the world. In fact, I had a friend of mine was actually working with them for a number of years in sales. And the big issue is just the volume. They have such a small volume of biomass they can handle. And the size, the significance of the scale in California is so big right now. I think as we start looking at solutions, I think we have to think bigger. We got to think about bigger cogeneration. We have to think about bigger ways to eliminate the biomass if we really want to affect the problem. And just kind of one little side note, when we look at campfires and folks effectively doing that, again, we need to look at different types of solutions. But I think our problem with that, again, is going to be scale. And often with campfires is alcohol associated with them. And so that's probably not the best people managing fire.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. Barney, are you channeling John Muir when you speak?
No. What do you say, Dan?
I think it's a mix of Gifford and John.
Michael, the reason I work for the Forest Service, I just have a passion for the work that I do, and mine is just, I've worked in 8 states and 4 regions of the Forest Service, and it's just my way of just looking at the world and trying to think about how to, when I'm no longer here, what have I done to leave this place in a better place? Mm-hmm. And so me, I'm not trying to channel anyone. It's just me speaking from the heart with my passion on how I feel.
Well, I just have to say it comes out like part of when you were speaking. I sent to Hannah, hey, you should watch the Ken Burns series on national parks. But as I was listening to you, I was like, damn it, man, he's got that spirit of John Muir in him.
Well, and he's not done yet either.
Very good.
I was just curious from a cost perspective. So Dan, you were saying that before, some of this forest is too dense to actually do prescribed fires, and even if you wanted to, so you'd have to do some sort of manual thinning process. What's the cost for something like that, and does that vary like super dramatically? Is it kind of predictable? Is there some way of kind of knowing what will cost to thin in a specific area?
Yeah, it is pretty dependent on the density or the tons per acre of the biomass, say, and so the higher tonnage rate, the cheaper actually it is to get it what we call blown in the van. chipped up and blown into the chip van to haul away, because you got more per unit area and it's cheaper than covering more ground. But usually it takes about 20 to 25, 28 bucks a ton to blow it in the van. And then, of course, you got to haul it. The longer haul, the farther. What we used to say, the old days when they had the standalone biomass plants and you had FERPA, the legislation that came out of the Arab oil embargo that built those power plants like Honey Lake and Wheeler Brader et al. We used to look at if you can deliver it for 40 bucks or less EDT, you can make a go of it. Once you got over that, you had to subsidize it yourself, and we used to subsidize it. We still do, because it is a much safer alternative than having to burn the forest, or do prescribed fire. So in general, that's kind of what it costs, and you can often, a good job will be two van loads per acre, 2.5, 3. And of course, there's 25 tons in a van load, green tons. And then if you're getting down to a half a ton per acre or a half a van load per acre, then that's getting a little spendy. Masticators do a very good job, and you'll see them along the roads, and you'll see them working, where they kind of flail everything up. They don't ship it all, put it in a van. That can range from $200 to $400 an acre. It's pretty darn spendy. But it does a good job, in terms of immediately reducing fuels. The one thing people don't talk about with fuel breaks, with this kind of work, is Mother Nature is pretty good at springing back from those kind of things. So you're going to have to maintain those, and the money and the commitment to maintain those over time is really important. Or theoretically, you can make it worse than it was before. When it comes back to really thick brush, because brush species have seeds that are in the ground that'll survive decades and decades. And of course, a fire or any other kind of disturbance, ground disturbance, they take off again, they sprout. So there's just a lot to it, in my opinion.
So with a lot to it, as a good sequitur, we are running up against time, and there's one more question that I would love to ask you both, but I'm going to add a challenge to it, which is to give us you're actually both very succinct and pithy, so this is hardly a challenge for either of you, but to give us the quickest nugget you can on the following, which is that you are both people who manage large scale programs, large land, and think and look in terms of large economic shifts. With that in mind, I'm interested to hear what you see in the pipeline, whether it is policy changes, economic shifts, social political changes in the communities that you work with and which we started the conversation with, those webs of networks. What do you see in the pipeline that is hopeful to you, that you think may be a meaningful factor in the issues we've been discussing today?
I'll start.
Yeah, go ahead.
Dan's a good closer. I think when it comes to fires, I think most people who lived in urban areas looked at the Sierras in Northern California and they said, that's over there. I think when the Thomas fire happened, when the Santa Rosa fires happened, the Camp Fire and the Hertz and all of those fires, I think it was an awakening for our society. And I think many people understand that these fires can come to a theater near me. And so I think there is an awakening of the impacts of fires. And I think there's a sense for me that more people want to be involved with helping to solve this problem.
And I agree with that. People get it now, or a lot more people get it than used to get it. And it's going to take some time to build the infrastructure up, to do the work across the landscape that needs to be done. It's going to take money. It's going to take federal money and it's going to take state money. The point being made earlier about the $2 billion that we spent on suppression. How about if we just took $1 billion of that? I mean, we could get a lot of work done. But with the money has to come staffing as well. on the Forest Service end, people dedicated to the reforestation and to all of that effort. They don't have that kind of staffing at this point. So, but I'm hopeful that we're starting to get it. I think we need to reimagine what a California landscape should look like, a wildland or forested landscape. And we have in our heads not only the deep dark forest and the great big trees and the high canopy closures, and we certainly need and want and should have a bunch of that around. But we need to do a little work around that areas to protect them, or they're going to be gone. And a lot of California, particularly at the lower elevations, people's heads need, or visual images of what that forest looks like, needs to be more open. I wouldn't quite say a savanna, but it needs to have a different vision of what those forests would look like if they were somewhat resilient to fire. And we don't have that mental image yet. I think we still have the deep dark forest image, and we want to apply that everywhere. And I don't think Mother Nature's going to indulge us in that here in California much longer.
All right, couldn't agree more with all of you. Well, I want to thank you both for sure, given the roles you have and the scale and throughout all your work, and especially now, just to take the time and share with us our community, local and more regional here that we have joined. Thanks everyone for coming and kind of continuing the thread. We started in the notion of, how can we use biomass? We've had a number of these salons. This is really about, what we call the checkerboard and playing across boundaries and working together because, the land, the air, the water, all the things we talked about is certainly shared. November 18th is our next session. It's same time on a 3:30 kickoff. And that one's going to be about best in class carbon sequestering accelerators. So we have Prime Coalition, Carbon 180, and some folks from Cyclotron Road. So it's going to be super exciting. That's more the space that I play. So I'm going to be trying not to jump in with all my questions, but invite everyone from this session and everyone to join, because it's really leaning into, all right, we're talking about it. We know it's a big challenge. We can't not do anything. So what can we do? Certainly the largest scale type of solutions, and then even just the small new ideas that can get to scale. So once again, I thank you all for joining us. And there's a link in the chat if you want to register and share questions. Shoot emails to the TTCF, myself or Teal emails, and we will try to connect and chat and share resources. But it's been great. Thank our experts, and thank you for all joining us.
See ya.
All right, take care.
Thank you, Robert. Honor to have you both. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Teal.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Happy Halloween.
Okay.
Whatever that means these days.
Our 3-year-old
Bye-bye.
our 3-year-old grandson is coming to visit for Halloween, so we got a lot on our
That's
house.
great. Do you have a costume?
Yeah. You should see mine. I'm not going to send a picture out, but
What?
I got a costume. Hey, for a 3-year-old grandson, you'll do anything.
Oh, Dad, I want to see this.
All right, see you guys later. Bye.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks,
right.
Mark. Thanks, Barney.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Hannah, thank you for your question. I love it. She just left.
Yeah, I did too. I think it was great. It's the same thing. We have to be at massive scale to even to solve it, but we got to start. So we can't not just have every time. I know I'm not saying I don't understand scale. And people
There's
are
a
saying
difference between bench to pilot and pilot to scale. And if we're only willing to go from bench to pilot if we already see scale, we're never going to try anything.
Right. Yeah. I do want to chat with Lawrence always what's the rate limiters and all that stuff. But yeah, you just have to, I don't know. And